to ignore the advice of your Mr. Doherty and ask town meeting for 3 additional minutes.
The speaker has asked for 3 additional minutes, making it 13 minutes. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed?
No.
Huh. I don't think they gave it to you, Chris.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Could you reset?
I will reset your clock, though.
Thank
you.
you.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 7, I would submit, is perhaps the most significant zoning bylaw change to the business district since the modern zoning bylaw came into effect in 1975. So I hope that town meeting gives it very careful consideration and understands very well exactly what it's voting on. I want to begin by saying I support mixed use, and I support the preservation of business uses, but I don't believe Article 7 does that. What it does is it promotes very high density residential development in a minimal amount of business use. Mr. Good, could you put up the first slide? Thank you. I'm going to come back to this, but I want to use this slide as a backdrop for a few minutes as I speak. This is a B2 district. The changes I'm going to talk about right now would apply in this district. This is called the Neighborhood Business District. The problem I have with this bylaw is that it ignores the distinctions that have traditionally existed within Arlington zoning bylaw. The way our bylaw works is that the number of the district indicates the intensity of use. So you go from R0 to R7 for the residential districts, with R7 being the high density apartment district. In the business district, you go from B1, which is the neighborhood office district, to B5, the central business district. This bylaw change will apply to all of those business districts except B1. What it does is it applies the residential density standards for high-density apartments to all of those business districts to which it applies. That is something that has never occurred before. And contrary to what Ms. Kowalski said, it in fact increases the density beyond what is allowed for commercial construction in many of those business districts. It also confuses the distinction of uses among the various business districts. Right now, the only place you can have light industry in Arlington is in the industrial district. And light industry includes things like machine shops, includes things like auto body repair shops. The way that mixed use is defined, and then you should look at the definition in the proposed vote, not the definition that was shown on the screen, because they're very different. It includes light industry with the other uses that are allowed in the business zoning districts. I think a lot of those uses are ones that people would feel are inappropriate and should not be allowed. But I would like to show exactly what the effect of this change would be using the example of the Brigham's development. So Mr. Good, if you could switch to the other PowerPoint presentation. And while he's doing that, what's going to come up in a moment is a plan of the Brigham's development. And the area that's shown in pink is the area designated for open space at this development. I'd like to put myself in the position of the developer of this site and show you what I'm going to do if you pass this zoning bylaw. I think most of you have probably seen what the development looks like now. Now, I'm going to convert it to a mixed use, and here's what I'm going to do that. The gray building on the right-hand side of this figure is indeed a commercial or business use. And what I'm going to do is just put a few apartments above that, and that is going to qualify me for mixed use. Remember, to qualify for mixed use, all that you have to do is get most of the frontage of the building on the first floor used for business use, and that's all. You do not have to have the entire first floor occupied. You only have to have most of the frontage of the first floor occupied. So by doing that, I've got a mixed-use development. And now that I have a mixed-use development, you have made things terrific for me as a developer. I no longer have to get a variance for this development because I meet the frontage requirements. It used to be 100, or it would be 100 if under the existing bylaw. Now it's reduced to 50. So I want to thank you very much for eliminating that requirement to get a variance, because if any of the neighbors had appealed that variance, I would have been in big trouble. Similarly, I no longer have to get a variance for the height, because this change to the zoning bylaw allows the ARB to ignore the dimensional requirements as part of the special permitting process. That is an unprecedented power that right now is only reserved for churches and nonprofit educational institutions. Now, as I said, I'm going to put my retail or some other business use on the first floor of that small building. And while my original plan was to give you 3,500 square feet, you know, I might only give you 1,000 or 2,000 square feet because, heck, you know, I'm giving you the entire frontage as business use, and I'll make that 50 feet wide along the frontage and 20 feet deep or 30 feet deep, and you've got 1,000 or you've got 1,500 square feet, and that's all of the business use I'm going to give you for this development. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is there are 0 requirements for open space under this proposed change. So all that area in pink there, I can use that for buildings, I can use that for parking lots. And that's just great because that allows me to build far more apartments than are currently being built there. And I can go from 135,000 square feet that I had been proposing to over 200,000 square feet of floor area. And I can go from 116 units to 245 units because you have rezoned this parcel for the densest residential use allowed in Arlington. So I'm sorry if you thought you were getting more business use, but I want to thank town meeting for passing this change because I'll be thanking you all the way to the bank when I collect rent from over twice as many people. Now, Mr. Good, if we could quickly move back to the other slides. I want to show you what can happen with this same change in the neighborhood business district. Okay, this is, as I said, a typical B2 district. I think it's kind of charming, small scale, and I don't say that just because it's my neighborhood. But if you look, this is a typical district. It is, the height of these buildings is 1 story. With the proposed change that you are being asked to approve, even in this district, you could go up to 5 stories. So let's look at the next slide, Mr. Good, if we could. And the problem you have with this neighborhood business district, or not a problem, but by design, these districts are close to residential districts. And here we have, you know, it's the same block. It's next to a 2-family home. But if we go to the next, I'm sorry, no, second slide of the other presentation. What does that do? Oh, is that for the, oh, I can do it? Okay, thanks. Well, suffice it to say, I'll continue talking while Mr. Good is trying to get the technology back. But, no, next slide, please. Great. So this is what happens, and I'm not even sure that's 5 stories. You can go up 50 feet. But another thing that's taken away by this bylaw change is something called a height buffer. And what's been institutionalized in our zoning bylaw is that when you have a large commercial or business use next to an R1 or R2 district, the maximum height is reduced. But this change does away with that height buffer. So if you happen to be the poor person like my neighbor who lives in that house, you can forget about watching the sunrise to the east, which is where that large addition is being put on. Now, if we go to the next slide, I'll just give you that in elevation to see what that looks like. But let's go to the next slide. And, you know, as Ms. Kowalski said, you know, we have mixed use in Arlington, and I think people are happy with it. But look, none of the examples she gave you were for buildings that were 5 stories high. At most, they were 3 like this. And, you know, I think you really need to think about the proper height. And if we go to the next slide, I mean, I would call this mixed-use development too, but it doesn't qualify under the zoning bylaw. There's no residential component. And if we go to the next slide, I would say this is how you do mixed use wrong. This kind of ugly development is in North Cambridge. Frankly, I would not like to see another story added to this building and moved into Arlington. So finally, let me conclude by saying, a lot of public officials have been talking about the master planning process. Given the magnitude of the changes that we're talking about, this sort of change really should come as an outgrowth of that process. It shouldn't be done on an ad hoc basis beforehand. So I suggest that if indeed that were the case, that it went through the master planning process, we would see a type of change to the zoning bylaw that would support mixed use in a way that people like and that the community would be far more comfortable with. So I'll ask you to vote no on this article and let the public process work. Thank you.